I couldn't have sounded whiter while saying that. Welcome, nerds, to another episode of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. You can subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcast you use, we're on it. You can check out all of our content on our website, thenerdspodcast.com. You can also like us on Facebook, facebook.com/thenerdspodcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. And finally, follow us on Letterboxd, which is basically just social media for watching movies. I am at The Nerds Podcast, and my co-host is at That Tyler Hunt. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, That Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
I am doing pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm a little under the weather, so I guess I can't say that I'm doing really well. But, yeah, if you hear me popping some cough drops here and there, I do apologize for that. But I woke up this morning and was feeling a little bit under the weather. But other than that, I had a great 4th of July. It's probably the best one I've ever had. Like, even as a kid, I wasn't a huge 4th of July fan. I don't get fireworks. Like, I don't understand people's obsession with them. Like, even as a kid, I didn't really get that excited for them. So basically spent the whole day watching Stranger Things season 3 because it just came out on July 4th. We ordered some pizza, got ice cream, and then went and saw Spider-Man. So it was a really awesome 4th of July.
That is a nice 4th of July. We also saw Spider-Man on the 4th of July, and same boat as you. Like, I've never really been super into the holiday. Like, I used to like to shoot off fireworks when I was a kid, and it was still, kind of a novelty to use a lighter and make things explode. But, I mean, I've really come to dislike it in the last few years since I've had Ivy, my dog, because she fucking hates it. Like, she'll shake.
Yeah, my dogs too.
Yeah, so I hate it even more. Apparently, it's illegal to shoot off fireworks in Ohio, but they can still sell it. So when you go to buy fireworks at a store in Ohio, they make you fill out a form saying where you're going to shoot the fireworks off at. And I guess everybody just lies on that form and still shoots them off on the 4th of July. So I did see the police out telling people to stop shooting off fireworks, but I mean, it wasn't enough. Like, it was still going off like crazy and my dog was shaking.
Yeah, I absolutely hate it. And I just kind of feel like Scrooge because I'm just like angry every time I hear one. It's so stupid too because my neighbors must fucking love it because they shoot them off like the week leading up, the week after. Like, they must spend like several $100s on fireworks. It's ridiculous. And when I don't even understand, like, we were going out to see Spider-Man on the 4th of July. Now, if you shoot them off on the 4th of July, cool. Like, whatever. Like, it's 4th of July. Like, I get that. But they were shooting them off at like 7:30ish, around there. It wasn't even fucking dark out anymore. Like, it hadn't even gotten dark yet. And so what are you doing? Dumb. You're just making loud noises at that point. Like, you can't even see them. So I don't even understand that. But yeah, my dogs are the same way. Like, we have to get them special treats from a specialty dog store in town to like calm them down. And we have like these little, like, I think they're called thunder shirts. Like, they're literally like, they almost like they swaddle dogs. Like, they're like this little wrap thing that you can put on them that basically comforts them a little bit. And yeah, we go all out because our dogs get really, really upset. And as we were talking about before we started recording, we actually adopted a cat too, which is probably the worst timing in the world to introduce an animal to two dogs that are already scared shitless because of fireworks. Like, literally, my dogs have never seen a cat in their entire lives. And we just decide the week that they're basically, it's a fucking war zone as far as they're concerned, I introduced them to this brand new animal. So it's been kind of a stressful week for them.
Yeah, no kidding. I almost got Ivy a thunder coat or thunder jacket or whatever it's called, and I decided not to, and I wish I would have, because then at least maybe she wouldn't shake as much. But I'm in the same boat as you. Like 4th of July, I get it. Like you're going to shoot the fireworks off and, I'll just deal with my dog because it is what it is. But the 2 nights after 4th of July, so Friday and Saturday, it was just a continuation and they kept fucking going. And that was too much. That's where I kind of draw the line. It's like, all right, it's over. You don't need to be a dick anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, the people down the street are really, really into it. And I don't understand. I just don't get it. And it's fine. It's whatever. But tonight, if you're shooting them off tonight, I'm going to get real pissed real quick because I got to fucking work in the morning. And if you're keeping me up, I'm going to get real pissed.
Yeah, man. I don't blame you.
All right. So if this is your first episode, we like to kind of just break down these episodes into different segments. The first segment, we just like to check in with each other. We don't get to have these nerdy conversations as frequently as we would like. So we just like to kind of check in with each other. And we call it what we're into. So what are you into this week?
So I'm actually rolling solo on something that I thought that we might be talking about together like we do from time to time in this segment. So when we got off of recording last week, I had brought up Midsommar because I figured that you would be seeing it and I knew I was going to be seeing it and I didn't know if I'd have time to watch anything else, so I thought we'd be talking about it together. But here we are. I saw it and you didn't, so I kind of get to give you a preview of what you're in for when you finally do get around to seeing it. So Midsommar is, of course, the new film that is written and directed by, I assume his name is pronounced Ari Aster. He also wrote and directed the movie Hereditary, which we talked about last year and which was in both of our top 10s of 2018. Yep. So if you're unfamiliar with Midsommar, it's about a group of friends, including one couple, that travel to Sweden to visit a summer festival, but it slowly unravels as it turns out that this rural village that they're in is a pagan cult that has some violent tendencies. Man, where to begin with this movie? So if you've seen the trailer and you've seen Hereditary, then you kind of have an idea of what to expect from this movie as far as the tone goes. It does the same thing as Hereditary, and it makes you really uncomfortable. But I would also say it's considered a horror movie, but it's not a horror movie in the traditional sense of what you typically get with like jump scares and other tropes. So that's how it's marketed. I don't agree that this movie's a horror movie, and I'm going to get into it. And fair warning, I'm probably going to compare this movie to Hereditary a lot because that's the only other notable work that Ari Aster has done. And again, the movies are very similar in tone. So anyways, like on to how I feel about Midsommar. So overall, it's a pretty interesting ride, but in my opinion, it's nowhere near as iconic as Hereditary was, especially as a horror movie. I mean, I just hinted at it a couple times, but I have a really hard time classifying this movie as a horror movie. I mean, crazy things happen throughout it, and the movie does an amazing job of making you feel uncomfortable in various situations, but I was never scared, and I never felt anxious as I was watching it. I felt like Hereditary did the same thing, but it also did a great job of turning the uneasiness that it was making you feel into a feeling of anxiety and being scared, not to mention that the third act of that movie is almost a straight horror movie. So in comparison to that, Midsommar doesn't really have much tension. It's just one weird thing after another that forces you to put together the pieces of what's going on and kind of has you guessing where things are going. It's definitely an interesting ride that is worth experiencing, but again, by no means is it scary to me. I'd probably compare this more to a dramatic thriller than I would to a horror movie. There's definitely the shocking gore and the adult themes that you would expect, but again, that doesn't really make it tense. And it didn't make me feel the way that Hereditary made me feel. So it's a bit disappointing because there's a lot of stuff that could have made this movie a bit scarier, and it all happens off screen, which I thought was an interesting decision, especially since this movie is 2.5 hours long. I think that at that runtime, There's definitely enough time to build the characters and the relationships and the themes of the movie in detail while showing some of the crazy stuff that happens off screen. But instead, there are drawn out scenes throughout the movie where characters are on psychedelics or they're having nightmares that don't really play into the larger scope of the movie that could have easily been trimmed to add some of that other stuff back in. I mean, I definitely wouldn't say I hate the plot by any means, but I feel like there was so much potential with the setup of this movie that it was kind of squandered in the long run. I will say performance-wise, I thought that the cast was excellent. Florence Pugh, or Pug, I don't know how you pronounce her last name. Either way, she plays the main character, Danny, and she's asked to do a lot in this movie, and she shows a wide range of emotions and does an amazing job doing so. Like, her character's all over the place throughout this movie, and she carries a lot of the weight. The supporting actors and actresses are great as well, but it's really her show, and she does an amazing job with it. So yeah, I mean, just to kind of summarize, I mean, it's a bummer that this movie wasn't what I was expecting from a horror aspect, but I will say I know that I came off a bit negative in this semi-review, but I definitely didn't hate the movie. I'd probably give it a 3.5 out of 5, and again, it's definitely worth a watch, but given how good the trailers were, and how much hype there was behind this movie, and then the lead in it had with Hereditary, I was expecting a bit more.
Yeah, so I was pretty excited to go see this movie, and like you said, we had kind of planned on doubling up with this movie, which we do occasionally for what we're into, kind of just basically doing a miniature review at the top of an episode. But I had this plan. So my plan was I was going to go see Spider-Man Wednesday night. I was going to be off 4th of July Thursday. We were going to go see Spider-Man, and then we were going to watch Stranger Things Season 3. Then we were going to see Midsommar. So unfortunately, Wednesday night at work, because it was a day right before a holiday in the middle of a week, it was super, super crazy. And I actually had to stay later than I normally have been staying. I've basically not worked an 8-hour shift in about a month and a half because I've been working 10, 12 hours every single day. Like, it's just been nuts at work recently. It got so crazy the third that I had to stay later than I have been. So I missed Spider-Man, so I just basically bumped Spider-Man to July 4th. And then I went to go, I literally bought a ticket last night for the 10:30 showing, and I went to the gym before, and I just started feeling a little shitty. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, and that kind of started last night. And so I was just like, I really don't want to sit through a 2.5-hour movie if I'm already feeling bad. So I will see this movie, even though you didn't give it a super positive review. I'll still go see it just because I am a fan of Hereditary. I'll just kind of keep my expectations a little bit lower than they were or would have been if I had seen this like I had planned on.
Yeah, and that being said, I'm super in the minority here because on Rotten Tomatoes, last I checked, this movie has an 82%. So you may walk away loving it. It just wasn't anywhere near Hereditary for me.
Cool, man. So I am going to jump into a show that I watched actually a couple of weeks ago. I just haven't had a chance to talk about it yet. And that is Good Omens, which is a 6-part miniseries on Amazon that was in the news a lot a few weeks ago for a couple of reasons. One, and kind of the most important reason it should be in the news, is the fact that it was pretty good. And then two, a group of silly Christians petitioned Netflix to cancel it. And I call them silly, not because they're Christians, but because there's a couple of reasons. One, the show's on Amazon, not Netflix. So they petitioned the wrong people to cancel the show. And two, it's a miniseries. So there's no need to cancel it because it's over. Like, it was 6 parts and it was done. It was based on one book. And the miniseries covered the entire book, from what I understand, because I never read the book. But it's kind of... the whole thing is pretty silly. The reason that they're angry, similar to the Kevin Smith classic Dogma, Good Omens is a strong satire of Christian mythology. It features Michael Sheen and David Tennant as an angel and a demon who enjoy their time on Earth and together so much that they hatch a plan to delay the end of days. now that I've kind of covered the reason that Christians are upset with this show, let's go back to the number one reason why this show should be in the news and more people should be talking about it. And that's the fact that it's really, really good. Michael Sheen and David Tennant are usually pretty good, but they really stepped up their game in this show. Their chemistry was fantastic. I'm not going to necessarily go as far to say that they carried the show, because there was a lot of really well-written and well-acted characters in this show. So it's not necessarily they had to do all the heavy lifting, but their characters are definitely the focal point of this show. And if they hadn't done as good of a job, I don't want to say that the show would have fallen apart necessarily, but it definitely would have been a lot less fun than it was. The writing really, really reminds me of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I think I actually tweeted that out. As I was watching it, I just got a very, very strong Hitchhiker's vibe to this whole show. It's just, first of all, there's a lot of really dry British-esque humor in this show that I enjoy quite a lot. That type of humor is really hit or miss for me, but Hitchhikers was really fun. Like that book hit for me every single time. And then this show it was the same way. Not all dry British humor is going to hit with me, but this show was really, really successful in that. And in Hitchhikers, there's a lot of just like weird, like side characters and side things that happen in that book and in those books that you're just like, why the fuck did that just happen? And then eventually it kind of swings back around and you're like, oh, that's why we spent a chapter talking about this particular person. And it kind of felt like while I was watching Good Omens, I was getting that vibe a lot. Like, why the fuck is that character in here? Why did we go all the way back in time and watch this witch hunt? And eventually all of that stuff kind of circles back around and makes more sense. And so I thought that was pretty awesome. Just the way that they were able to weave all these different storylines and make it make sense by the end was really, really successful. I will say that I think I probably like this show more. I don't know if you've watched it, Tyler. I'm assuming you haven't. But I'm assuming that if you do end up watching it, I'm assuming that I liked it or will like it more than you, just because I know that you're not a huge fan of the dry British humor, but I would suggest giving this a shot because it is really good.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen previews for this show, like before movies, like they have featurettes based on it, and I've ordered a couple things from Amazon that came shipped in Good Omen boxes. So this show's been on my radar, especially because I do like David Tennant, but it's not something that I've dived into yet. Did you say how many episodes it was?
It was 6. It's 6 parts, yeah.
Yeah, so that's not bad at all. So I imagine at some point I will watch this. I'm still kind of making my way through Chernobyl and, of course, Stranger Things for our Stranger Things review next week. But this will definitely be on my radar.
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely suggest it. I would definitely say finish Chernobyl first because I like that a lot more than I liked Good Omens, but that's just because I fucking love Chernobyl. But yeah, Good Omens is also pretty good.
Awesome, man. So you ready to dive into nerd news?
For sure.
So a few different things this week. The first was a surprise, and it was meant to be a surprise, and that's the fact that the Walking Dead comic series is abruptly over. So it was purposefully abrupt. It was kind of a surprise ending, but it was announced that issue 193 that came out this last Wednesday was going to be the finale of the comic series like 2 days before it came out. So I don't want to get into spoilers and what has happened in the comic series or what happened in issue 192 to kind of set up issue 193 for those of you that still read that comic book. But it's kind of a milestone. I mean, that comic was a big deal when it came out, and then it was successful and it was popular. And then, of course, you know, despite what we think about the Walking Dead show now, it spawned what was a cultural phenomenon. So it's surprising to me that it's over, because I think that idea and the idea of zombies has legs, of course, because, I mean, you can continue to tell an apocalyptic story for a long, long time. But I respect Robert Kirkman for deciding to end it on what he considered to be a high note. I don't read the comic, so I couldn't tell you if it was a high note or not, but I appreciate him not kind of driving it into the ground like they've done with the show.
Yeah, so I had said for a long time, because I did read the comic for a long time. I read it in volume, so I didn't get issue to issue. I started real late. I think I started after like volume 3 or 4 had already come out. So they were well into like the 30 issues or whatever it was before I started reading it. So I just kept up with the volumes. And I kind of said all along that as I got less and less interested in the TV show, that I wasn't going to allow the TV show to make me disinterested in the comic. But unfortunately, after really 2, and I think you could probably argue 3 seasons of just piss poor, just slow burn, but no payoff type of seasons of The Walking Dead, I did kind of give up on the comic as well. So I'm not even sure what's happening right now in the comic. I think I don't even know where I was at in the volumes. I had to have been at least in the 20s. If that sounds right. I can't, like I said, I've just completely shut my brain off from The Walking Dead for a good couple of years now. But I will say, even though I have no idea where they're at right now, stopping at 193 does kind of annoy me a little bit, because that just seems like a weird number to stop on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, whenever I saw the headline to this story, I assumed it was the TV show.
I was kind of hoping it was.
Well, it was like, Andrew Lincoln left, and the actress that plays Maggie, I think, is trying to leave. Denai Guerrera, who plays Michonne, is leaving. So at what point do you just pull the plug on the show?
Yeah.
So that made sense to me. I was like, oh, all right, well, that makes sense. But for whatever reason, the thought had never crossed my mind that they'd be ending the comic book. So I was definitely surprised.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, if it did in fact end on a high note, which neither one of us will probably ever know, because neither one of us will probably go and read all of those issues. But yeah, if they think it ended on a high note, that's the way to go out for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, man. All right, so moving on to other stories. So we have to check back in on this movie, because chances are it will never be made, because there's been so many people attached and unattached to it. But the Flash movie, starring Ezra Miller, has a new creative force behind it. So this has definitely been a saga in and of itself. Like, directors have come and gone, and writers have come and gone. I think a few months ago we talked about a story where Ezra Miller was going to write a script with Grant Morrison, and because he was unhappy with the script that had been turned in and wanted to have like a darker take on it. Well, apparently in May, Warner Brothers told Ezra Miller that his script sucked and they weren't going to use it. And now they've hired Christina Hodson to write a script. She wrote the Birds of Prey movie that's coming out next year, which is fine, whatever. I mean, we don't know what that movie is going to look like till it comes out. But what is a bit promising is that they're in talks with It Chapters 1 and 2 director Andy Muschietti to
Once you started
direct.
saying that, I was like, I got really excited, because I know his last name is pretty unique.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud with not stuttering over that. So yeah, Andy Muschietti, that's what I'm going to go with, is most likely going to direct this movie if it gets made. What's surprising is that I think Ezra Miller's contract was up, and that was like the whole final stab at it, was he was going to write this script with Grant Morrison. But by all accounts, he's still attached to play the Flash, so he must have re-signed something, or he must still be open to it. I mean, at this point, I think you just recast and go a different direction, because you're kind of doing that already with these other DC movies. But I mean, whatever, man. Maybe Andy Muschietti and Christina Hodson have a take on the Flash that's worth making.
Yeah, I'd almost say, and I mean, of course, I have been saying this, like, Shazam was really fun. It really, other than a few things here and there, it really doesn't have any tie-ins to the overall. Like, there's nobody that has a cameo in that movie, so you don't really have to tie that. I mean, yeah, they talk about Superman taking the bullet or whatever, but I mean, you don't really have to. That could be any Superman. So I don't think that they necessarily have any tie-ins there. I think their biggest problem will eventually be Wonder Woman, because those movies are so good and so successful, while that movie is so good. We don't know about the Wonder Woman 1984, but yeah, I think that's going to be their biggest hurdle right now, because I mean, Aquaman was good, but I mean, it wasn't enough to save that universe. So I don't know. They're kind of in a weird spot right now, and I would definitely just say move on with Shazam. I mean, not move on with Shazam. I mean, you want to save it, but just kind of save that for the next universe and keep Wonder Woman intact, and just kind of move on from there. Recast it, do whatever you're gonna do. Have the new Batman movie kind of kick it off, and maybe even if this Joker movie is successful, which I think it probably will be, maybe that can also kind of jumpstart this new universe.
Yeah, I don't disagree, man. I think that they've moved away from universe building, and I think that that's a good idea. And it sounds like Ezra Miller's being a royal pain in the ass.
For sure.
So just recast him.
Yeah, and I don't even understand the leverage that he thinks he has. He was in a not successful Justice League movie. Yeah, he was probably the best part of that movie, but still it was a shit show. And then he was in fucking The Crimes of Grindelwald. Like, it's not like he's this like huge movie star that he has all this clout in the industry. He was in 2 somewhat successful franchises, and that's about it.
Yeah, but for some reason Warner Brothers has a bug up their ass about him, so
I don't know, it's weird.
All right, cool. So there were a few trailers that came out this week. So I'm curious if you watched any of them. Knowing your history, you probably did not, especially since one of them came out today.
But I saw the one for today.
Anyways. So we'll start there then. So did you watch the Mulan trailer?
I did, and I'm very excited about it. I think it looks awesome. Like, Mulan is a movie that I've seen a couple of times, but it wasn't always my favorite. And I'm getting really cool vibes from it. I mean, it was like a teaser. It was, I think, less than like 2 minutes long, but it looks pretty awesome. I love those like samurai kung fu Jet Li movies like Hero and Fearless, and it kind of gives me a strong vibe of those types of movies. He's actually in the movie too, which is pretty cool. I didn't know that until I looked it up, and he's actually in that movie, or in Mulan as well. So I'm super psyched for this movie.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely went a different route with this movie than the other live-action Disney remakes have gone. Like, when you watch this trailer, it doesn't feel like a Disney movie until the title card comes up and it says Disney's Mulan. So, I mean, obviously being based on the animated film that came out in the late 90s, but, you know, there's no Mushu, there's no Eddie Murphy wisecracking, there's no singing, there's none of that in this movie. They decided to go for the straight take on it, the very serious take on it, and I think that it has what it takes to make a really cool movie. But I'm not gonna lie, man, I'm gonna miss some of the songs from that movie. I fucking love "Let's Get Down to Business" to defeat the Huns. I don't love it enough to know the name of the song, I guess, but I know the lyrics. So
yeah, I don't have any ties to that movie, and maybe that's why I was so psyched when I saw the trailer, was that I don't really have any like emotional ties. I forget that's even a Disney movie, to be honest with you. I know a lot of people are really, really big fans, and maybe they'll be disappointed with the teaser trailer because it seems like they're going in a different direction. But I mean, I'm super psyched. Like I said, I love those like kung fu samurai movies like Fearless and Hero, and I was getting a strong vibe from that trailer that it's going to be a lot like those movies, and I'm all on board, man.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a straight up war movie.
Yeah, for sure.
In a way, so it's interesting. So the other trailer I was going to bring up was Jumanji, The Next Level, I believe is what it's called.
Did not see that one.
So I don't want to spoil it for you, but obviously this is a sequel to Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, which came out in December 2017. And the twist to this movie that is shown in the trailer is that obviously, like, you know, the video game avatars are back. So Karen Gillan, The Rock, Kevin Hart, and Jack Black are all back. But the twist is that, I don't know, they don't really set it up well in the movie, but long story short, different characters get sucked into the game. So while these actors are the same as the game avatars, they're playing different personalities. So Karen Gilliam is the only character, or I guess the only actress playing the same character with the same personality. Like, she's still the girl that gets sucked in from the first movie. The bigger guy that was played by Kevin Hart in the first movie is now played by Jack Black, which is a bit of a turn. And then The Rock and Kevin Hart are playing... I don't know. It's so hard to tie this all together, but they're basically playing Danny DeVito and what's that actor's name? Oh, this is embarrassing. The guy from oh my God, Lethal Weapon, Danny Glover. So The Rock is playing Danny DeVito and Kevin Hart is playing Danny Glover.
So it's the same people, like the real life people, right?
Yeah, I guess. So, like, something weird happens with the game, and they're trying to find the other characters or their friends that got sucked into the game, but the main 4 video game avatars are different personalities this time around.
That just feels lazy to me. That feels like they made a sequel for sequel's sake, which, I mean, I know they did,
100%.
I don't know. That doesn't seem that interesting to me.
Yeah, same with me. Like, I think it's going to get old watching The Rock play The Rock, but with the personality of an old man. Same with Kevin Hart. Like, it's a strange creative choice, and I'm curious to see how it translates into an 1.5 to 2 hour long movie.
For sure.
All right, so I was going to talk about one other trailer, but then I never got around to watching it. So the Knives Out trailer, which is the next Rian Johnson movie, released a trailer this week, but I did not watch it. Did you watch it?
I did not.
Okay, cool. Well, I heard it's good, but we can't comment on that, so we'll move on. So the last news story is kind of a news story for me. I went to see Midsommar the other night. Obviously, I talked about it and what I was into, and the manager of Regal Movies was checking me out because my local theater is a Regal Movies, and he let me know, hey, I see you come in here a lot. You have a lot of points on your Regal reward card. Just want to let you know in 3 weeks we're launching our movie subscription service. It'd be $18 to see unlimited movies per month. You can literally see a movie 90 minutes after you see a movie. So I about passed out because ever since I moved up here, I've been jealous of your AMC stubs, and obviously Movie Pass shit the bed. So I've just been going to the movies like I normally would, but it's like anywhere from $8 to $11 anytime I want to go. So I'm pretty happy that Regal is jumping onto the movie subscription train, and they're offering this. I don't know that it's been technically announced yet, but it looks like the details have leaked. And the way they're doing it is, yes, it's unlimited movies per month, but your pricing tier depends on your location. So it's either $18, $21, or $24 per month. And the Regal Movie Theater closest to me has not had any renovations. It's not, recliner seating or anything. So that's why it's probably in the cheapest tier. But you would just pay more if you go to a Regal that's in a higher tier. So you'd pay a couple extra bucks to go, I guess. So, again, not really super interesting to you because you don't have any Regals in Evansville, but I'm excited to save some money with all the movies I get to go see.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I definitely, and as longtime listeners and people that follow me on Letterboxd know that I have definitely stepped up my movie watching, and that is all due to the fact that I have A-List, and I'm sure you'll be the same way once you get this subscription service. And if I'm not mistaken, the movie theater that we go to in Indy, when we usually go see a movie at Indy PopCon, is a Regal theater as well. So you kind of get that as well. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, for sure, man. So I'm excited for that to roll out here at the end of this month.
Yeah, that's very cool. I'm surprised we haven't heard anything. I'm surprised us hearing about it is through that guy.
Yeah, I was like, he must be mistaken. There's no fucking way I haven't heard about this, or they're not advertising this yet. But when I got out of Midsommar, I Googled it, and it said, all signs point to this being announced in the next couple weeks. So I'm excited.
So we're literally breaking news right now. This is super exciting.
Yeah, insider talk from the manager at the Regal Movie Theaters in Medina, Ohio.
Yeah, for sure. That's where you get all the breaking news. I'm surprised you didn't know that. He's the deep throat of nerd news right there. All right, so on to our main topic. As we kind of talked about a little bit, and as many of you have already figured out, we are going to review Spider-Man Far From Home, which was directed by John Watts, who, of course, directed the first film, the Spider-Man Homecoming film. He also wrote and directed Cop Car, which is a movie I know I talked about on the podcast before. It was a pretty cool little indie movie, so I was pretty excited when I saw that he was going to be doing the first Spider-Man movie, and he did a really great job with that. So we'll get into how we feel about Far From Home here in a second. Following the events of Endgame, Peter Parker needs a vacation, so he tries to play it cool on a school trip overseas. Unfortunately, Nick Fury has other plans. So this is the point of the review when we talk about our expectations or excitement or whatever. I don't feel like there's a whole lot of reason to spend too much time talking about our expectations for this particular movie. We both love the MCU and we both love Spider-Man. I will say, however, that I was interested to see how it was going to handle the events of Endgame. This is the first movie since Endgame, so I was kind of curious how they were going to handle it. This is the first time that we're going to see how the real world is handling people coming back from the snap. So I was a little excited and curious to see how that was going to play out. But, of course, we're both super excited for this movie.
Yeah, obviously, I was excited for a few different reasons. Obviously, everything you said, like this is a cool semi-sequel to Endgame where we get to see some of the ramifications of that movie without having to wait a couple years. And then not only that, but you also have a really cool character in Mysterio, finally coming to the big screen as well. So I was super excited to see that too.
For sure. So I will say before we get right into the review, there will be a spoiler section, but I don't know about you, Tyler, but there are some spoilers for Endgame that if you haven't seen Endgame, I mean, I'm assuming most people, that movie is almost gonna, it's gonna come very short of being the most profitable movie in cinema history. So there's very few people that haven't seen it at this point. But just warning everybody that we will spoil Endgame if you haven't seen that. We will have a spoiler section for Far From Home, and we warn you for that. But if you haven't seen Endgame, this might not be the best review for you to listen to because we're just going to go for it. So if you haven't seen Endgame, you've been warned. So the first segment that we always start these reviews with is just kind of a general overview. We call it broad strokes. So how'd you feel about Spider-Man Far From Home?
I don't think it's shocking that I liked this movie quite a bit. I feel like it's a pretty fitting end to Phase 3 too. I mean, it wraps things up. It shows what life is like after Endgame, and it also briefly teases what's to come in the next few years. So I thought that, again, it was kind of a nice cap. I will say, I wasn't bought into all of the creative choices that this movie makes, and I don't think in the grand scheme of things, this movie surpasses Homecoming for me like I thought it would. I wasn't huge on the European setting. I wasn't huge on the class field trip aspect of it, or honestly, even the inclusion of Nick Fury and Maria Hill. So, those are all little nitpicks that we're going to get to in the story. And I'd still consider this a really good movie, but it's not the earth-shattering Spider-Man story that I was expecting.
Yeah, 100%. I've said this before, and I guess I'll say it again. Spider-Man isn't just my favorite comic book character. He's probably my favorite character, period. I'm into comic books because of Spider-Man. He's had several movies, and it's pretty clear at this point that the MCU really doesn't want to use a villain that has already been used before. So I was really curious to see how they were going to pull off Mysterio. He is a really cool character, like you said earlier, but he's not a character that I ever thought could carry his own movie. Like, I never thought that he was a character that could be a big bad. He just definitely felt like a side character to me. He's had some really cool moments and some really big moments in the comic books. I just never thought that he was a character that could hold his own movie. And we'll get into that here in a little bit with the story segment. I will just say that some of those fears were justified, at least from my opinion. But I'm going to sound very similar to how I felt about Toy Story 4 in the sense that even though I didn't think that every story element worked as well as it could have, at the end of the day, it was a really fun movie and it was really funny. And so I enjoyed watching this movie quite a lot. It just wasn't as good as some of the other MCU movies and some of the other Spider-Man movies have been in the past.
Yeah, totally fair.
All right, so let's jump right into the story. So the first thing that you see in this movie is a very funny, clever way for the MCU and this movie to kind of explain what happened with the snap and kind of what's happened since then. So how'd you feel like this movie did as far as dealing with those ramifications?
I mean, like I mentioned in my broad strokes, I thought that this was a fitting end to Phase 3 because it explored the snap on a more personal level than the global level that Endgame dealt with. And it showed some of the more detailed intricacies of what would have happened in a situation like that. And they used humor in a situation that, in Infinity War and Endgame was not very humorous. So without spoiling like specific things, like it shows like what happened when people came back from the snap, and the way that they show it on video at the beginning of this movie was very humorous. So I thought that it was an interesting take on something, again, that has been a very serious point of conversation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for the last, year and some change. I will say it's kind of convenient that all of the main characters in Spider-Man's life were snapped away, but that's easily forgivable because you want all of those characters to be in this movie and to be a part of his life going forward.
Yeah, for sure. And I completely agree with you. They did have this humorous take, and it was kind of a nice change of pace from Infinity War and Endgame because, I mean, those movies are just emotional roller coasters. So it's nice that they kind of had a humorous take, and you had the shitty slideshow with giddy images and stuff like that. Like, that was a really cool way to kind of tell an emotional story and kind of tell really exposition, but in a fun and a really light way. So I definitely appreciated that. One of the heavier things that they had to deal with in this movie that, I mean, you kind of they have to address, because the character played such a big role in Peter Parker's life, is the fact that, and this is the big spoiler for Endgame that we have to talk about, is the fact that Tony Stark and Iron Man died at the end of Endgame. So how do you feel like they handled that?
I mean, similar to the snap, I think that touching on this quite a bit in this movie makes a lot of sense in the shadow of Endgame. Tony Stark / Iron Man is basically a messiah at this point that sacrificed himself for literally half the planet. I mean, he died for us like Iron Jesus. So the accolade he gets in this movie is definitely warranted, and it's a logical step after Endgame. And of course, that leads to how that impacts Peter. And I love how it impacts that character in this movie. It's the underlying driving force of that character, his choices, and the pressure he feels throughout this entire movie, which I think is very timely. I would say it's probably the best storytelling element of the entire movie.
Yeah, 100%. And even if you say a lot of stupid shit the rest of this review, the fact that you said Iron Jesus is enough for me, because now that can be the episode title. So I'm just happy that you said something like that. So I can use that as the episode title. It's going to look really good in the SEO to have Iron Jesus as the title for this episode. I thought it was an interesting thing that they did, like having Iron Man like constantly in the background. I thought that was kind of a cool way to kind of emphasize how that event in Endgame is kind of looming over Peter at all times. Like, literally, there's multiple shots in this movie where you can just see, I mean, he's literally sitting in an art room at one point, and they just have drawings of Iron Man scattered throughout the entire art room, and it's kind of like in the background. And there's another scene where he's kind of standing on a building, and you can see graffiti of Iron Man behind him. Like, it's always looming over him. And so I thought that was a really cool way to visualize that, because that obviously would be a big deal. Like, you don't just do away with that character in a few months since Endgame happened. So I thought that was really cool that they addressed it, and it kind of was that thing that was always looming over him the entire time, and the fact that he felt like somebody needed to fill those shoes, and he didn't feel like he was ready, which kind of comes full circle from Homecoming, where he thought he was ready, but then Tony kept telling him that he probably wasn't ready. And so I thought that was kind of cool that now he was all gung-ho in Homecoming, and now he's kind of pumped the brakes a little bit. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So moving along, how'd you feel they did with the relationship between MJ and Peter?
I liked it quite a bit. I loved how it was classic, but it was also a lot different from what we know about Peter Parker and MJ. Them crushing on each other is classic, but the awkward flirting is new. I mean, it's definitely a new and awkward MJ, but Peter still feels the same way he would have if it was the comic version of MJ that's calm, cool, and collected. I think the whole high school romance is kind of cute, and again, even though the characters are different, it still feels very similar to the way that the characters went back and forth in the comics and on the animated show that I grew up watching. I also honestly love what they've done with the MJ character in these movies to make her fresh. The only thing I dislike is that her name is Michelle instead of Mary Jane, but making her weird and awkward not only plays to the movie's humor, but it also makes the character just different enough to include her after we've had a Mary Jane in the past.
Yeah, and what I really like about their relationship and kind of their characters in general is, for me, one of the things that I always related with Peter Parker was that he was a nerdy dude. And I was always kind of a nerdy kid growing up. Different kind of nerdy, because I wasn't like super smart or anything like that. But he's nerdier than past versions that we've seen of the character. And so I appreciate that they're kind of just two nerds awkwardly flirting with each other. And I think that that's super cute, because I've had that not exact conversations with girls in high school, but very similar, like those very awkward conversations. And so I saw a lot of my past self in those situations. And so I thought that was really cool. They're just two weird characters, and they just... It doesn't follow like the rom-com tropes just because they're just so unique type of characters. So I definitely appreciate that. And it doesn't feel like it was force-fed to us. Like, it felt organic in the movie. So I appreciate that. Because there's some movies where it's just like, it's an action superhero movie, and then all of a sudden, you have to pump the brakes for a second because they have to have like a romantic scene together. And it just doesn't feel like it fits. In this movie, it felt like it really fit well into the whole context of the movie. So I appreciate that. So my biggest complaint with this movie would have to be with the villain. Not because I don't think that he's an interesting villain or that he's not well done. And we'll get into performances here in a little bit. But like I said, in broad strokes, I don't feel like he's a villain that can really hold his own in this movie. I'll get to that here in a second, but I do want to hear your thoughts on Mysterio as the big bad in this movie.
So I'm glad you got that out of the way, because I was curious if I needed to tiptoe around this or not, because I'll get to it in a second, but the promotional material for this movie did a really good job of never letting on that Mysterio was the villain, even though anyone who is even remotely familiar with Spider-Man knows that Mysterio is a villain, so I didn't know if we were going to get into the character's turn or not. So I think this is a place that we are going to disagree, though. Because I didn't mind Mysterio in this movie. If I hadn't already said that the Iron Man subplot was the best storytelling part of the movie, I'd say that it was with Mysterio and what they did with his character. I thought that it was super faithful to the comics while also updating him to not only fit into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but to also be more relevant and current. I love that everything that has to do with his motives in this film ties into everything that's happened already in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yeah. The only thing that I'm honestly on the fence about is the decision to portray him as a hero and play it off like it's a twist when he's the villain. So that goes back to what I was just saying about the promotional material for the movie. I don't hate it, and I'm glad that they decided not to show it in the trailers, but they play the long game in this movie, and they don't show his cards until a good portion of the way in. And that entire time, you know that there's a villainous twist coming up. Like, my wife even knew that there was a villainous twist coming up, and she barely knows anything about Spider-Man. So I thought that it was kind of weird that they waited so long to kind of show that he was the villain of the movie, because obviously everyone knew it was coming.
Yeah, so I didn't even consider that when I was trying to come up with like story beats that we could talk about, and I knew we were going to do a spoiler section, and I didn't even consider that to be a spoiler, because I assume at this point people are so into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and so many people have gotten into these characters through the movies that I assume that most people that were listening to this would know that he was eventually going to be a bad guy. And I don't necessarily dislike the way that they did it. I actually really enjoyed the way that they did it. I was definitely sitting there waiting for it to happen, and when it does kind of happen, I'm like, okay, here we go. Now we can really get into this movie, because the movie, despite being funny and despite being really fun and enjoying the characters kind of interacting with each other, it did kind of feel flat until that point. And then there's this really cool scene that happened shortly after it that we're going to touch on when we talk about the action. But the one issue I had with making him the big bad of this movie is the fact that, given his powers, which of course they do it differently than they did it in the comics, which I appreciated, because they do have a tendency to do that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They can't completely ground these characters, but they at least attempted to do it with Mysterio, which I appreciated. Once you establish his powers and like his trick, essentially, it kind of lowers the stakes for the rest of the movie, because you never really know if it's real or not. And that was my issue throughout the whole movie, is because after that, you don't really know if it really happened or not. So you don't really get 100% invested, at least I didn't, in what was happening on screen, because you never really knew if they were going to pull the curtain back on you or not. And so that was my biggest issue, was I wasn't on the edge of my seat like I normally would be in a Spider-Man movie, because I was just waiting for the, oh, gotcha. Like, that wasn't real. By the way, that wasn't real. Like, Nick Fury dies like 3 times in this fucking movie, but he doesn't die 1 time in this movie. So it was just kind of that, like, once you establish that, it lowers the stakes so much in this movie. Everything else was fantastic. I really don't have any other complaints about this movie other than minor nitpicks here and there. I didn't feel as invested in this movie because of that.
I mean, the other thing I'd say about the choice to do Mysterio, and to not only do him, but to do him the way they did it, was I see your point, but I do like that it made this movie different from most superhero movies, even movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where the climax is them punching each other.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil too much about like what they do with the character and his powers, but basically, like, you never get a sense that Jake Gyllenhaal can actually fight in this movie, because he's kind of like a mastermind. So it's more about Spider-Man 100%. Getting to him as opposed to fighting him, which I thought was kind of a cool turn on what these movies typically are.
100%. And it kind of feels funny because Tony Stark is kind of looming over Peter the entire time, and you're almost fighting an evil Tony Stark at this point. So that was kind of interesting as well. Obviously, he doesn't have quite the suit that Tony did, but it definitely is an interesting take. It just, for me, like I said, I just wasn't as invested in it, because you never really knew until after it happened whether or not it was real or not. So as far as performances, I think we can go pretty quickly, because most of these characters have been played in multiple movies. But how do you feel about the performances in Far From Home?
I mean, you said it, man. I don't have too much here. Tom Holland continues to be what I would say is the definitive version of the live-action Spider-Man. I think that the returning supporting cast also continues to be great. Jake Gyllenhaal, despite what we could say about Mysterio, I think that he was amazing as Quentin Beck, especially after the turn, when he kind of becomes the more comic book version of Quentin Beck. So I thought that he was fantastic, and he brought a lot to that character. Going back to the supporting cast really quick, I would also say that Zendaya was great in the first movie, but I think that she actually improved in this movie and was just fantastic as MJ. Again, she wasn't bad before, but I think that she kind of found her footing a little bit more in this movie and plays the awkward, weird girl extremely well, especially because I gathered that in real life she is not an awkward, weird girl. So, yeah, I mean, performances were all really great in my opinion.
Yeah, I will say I do want to point out, for characters that you didn't mention, I would say that Ned and Betty were the funniest couple in the movie if it wasn't for Martin Starr and JP. Is it JB Smooth? Is that his name?
Yeah.
I couldn't have sounded whiter while saying that. Yeah, they were fantastic. All four of them, like those two couples, and I'm calling those two couples, they were just fantastic. They were great comic relief, especially Ned and Betty. They were fantastic.
Dude, the joke about witches did not get old for me. I thought it was hilarious.
Fantastic. All right, so moving on to the action, I will say that I think I mentioned this a few times, probably too many times when I did my 14-hour stream of the Spider-Man game on PS4, that I was never going to get tired of swinging through New York as Spider-Man, and I don't think I'll ever get tired of seeing Spider-Man fight on the big screen. That being said, like I said earlier, the first third of this movie, when he did fight, did seem pretty generic, just that generic superhero fight. And not to give too much away, because we're not quite to the spoiler section, you're supposed to kind of feel like that. Like, it's not really all that imaginative, and then there's a reason for that, but it still just kind of makes the movie a little lackluster for me. But once that turn does happen, there is this scene where it's just really, really fucking cool. Like, it's a really unique thing that they did, despite lowering the stakes, like I said in the story segment. This scene is probably 15-20 minutes of just nonstop, just cool thing after cool thing after cool thing. That concept really allowed the filmmakers to really have fun with the character, and I really appreciate that. That particular scene reminded me a lot of a comic that I talked about, I think one of the first 10 episodes of the podcast, so don't go back and listen to it. But I talked about a mini series called Marvel Knights Spider-Man, and he has a very he gets drugged in that comic book, and he has a very trippy thing that happens to him, and it feels very similar. And I think maybe it might have been Mysterio that did it to him. I can't remember, but it reminded me a lot of that comic book, and I don't know if that was something they were going for. Maybe they got inspiration from that comic book. I have no idea. But that scene itself was just so fucking cool, and it almost kind of made up for the generic superhero action that we saw from the beginning.
I totally agree with you, and all of the Spider-Man action in this movie is fine. The climax is great, and the elemental fights are okay. But the best parts of the movie for me are definitely those Mysterio moments after the turn. I feel like it's straight out of the comic book, and it feels like classic Mysterio. Sure, he's not necessarily using those little cubes or using the special effects from being a Hollywood stuntman or actor, but it still felt really classic to me. I thought that they were super well done, and those are probably my favorite parts of the movie.
Yeah, 100%. That scene really, it just kind of stole the show. Other than comic relief from those couples that I mentioned earlier, that scene was the standout for me. That will probably be, other than the fact that I love Spider-Man, that'll probably be the thing that I remember first anytime I think about this movie.
I agree.
All right, so let's go ahead and put a star rating out of 5 stars, and then we will jump into our spoiler section. I actually remembered this review that we were doing the star ratings first. So out of 5 stars, would you give Spider-Man Far From Home?
If I watch this movie again, which I will, I think I could be talked up, but I am going to give this movie a 3.5 out of 5. I know that the actual review is actually pretty positive that I gave, but I did hint at some things in broad strokes that we didn't really touch on that didn't really land for me. And unfortunately, those are big parts of the movie. So again, if I see this movie again, I might give it a 4. But for now, I'm going to stick to a 3.5.
As we do a lot of the times. We're kind of on the same wavelength with this review. I am going to give it 3.5 as well. I mean, it's not quite as good as Homecoming, but it's still a very, very good movie, and it's probably one of the best Spider-Man movies. So yeah, I enjoyed it, even though I did have a few things here and there that I didn't particularly like about it. So let's jump into the spoilers section. Obviously, I will put an extra show note in the show notes to this episode. If you want to skip ahead, hit that 30 seconds or 15 seconds a few times, whatever you want to do, you have been warned. So it's actually kind of funny. The biggest things were actually in the mid-credit scenes in the stinger. So the three things that I want to talk about, we'll start off with the two smaller things, which are Jonah Jameson is back in the Marvel cinematic, in the Spider-Man cinematic universe, and he is played once again by J.K. Simmons beautifully. Like, it was so awesome. The fact that they were able to keep that a secret and just hit us with it at the very end of this movie was just fantastic. And I love the fact that he's not, well, at least he doesn't look like the newspaper tycoon like he was in the comic books and in the original franchise. He feels more like the InfoWars type of guy that he was in the video game. So I thought that was really, really cool.
So obviously Marvel has become known for their mid-credit and after-credit scenes, but over the last few years, they've kind of carried less and less weight.
For sure.
Which is fine. I mean, you shouldn't do all of your storytelling, or your big moments shouldn't be in the credits, but this movie kind of brought them back to the forefront after Endgame didn't have any credit scenes. And Jonah Jameson was by far the standout for me. I mean, to me, that was the best MCU cameo I've seen as far as I'm concerned. So obviously I loved it. Obviously, to your point, J.K. Simmons made that role, and it would have been hard for anyone else to follow in his footsteps. So I love that they brought him back. And again, you said an exact thought I have, which was it's almost like the PS4 game version of that character that does a podcast or does a radio show, because newspapers are not really relevant anymore. So I love that they were also able to incorporate him in that way.
100%. So there was three things that I want to talk about with these stingers, and one of them I thought was pretty stupid. And we're going to talk about the thing that I thought was pretty stupid. The Nick Fury stuff. How'd you feel about it?
Sometimes I hate how much on the same wavelength we are. I mean, I wouldn't say I hated it, but it was not great. It was kind of throwaway, and to me, it diminishes those characters and what they did throughout the entire movie.
For sure.
It doesn't ruin the movie for me by any means, but it just seems like a weird afterthought. I guess it does explain some of their bad decisions, especially when it came to buying into the Mysterio character so quick. Like, I don't think the real Nick Fury would have done that, but overall, it again kind of put a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, and I get that them trying to do like the shield and the sword thing. So that's interesting. I'm curious to see if that's going to actually play out, because we've seen certain things, most notably the stinger at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 with Adam, like that really not playing any part. And we'll see if it plays a part in Volume 3 or not. But there's been stingers in the past that just haven't really come into the MCU yet. And so I'm curious to see if that's going to play a bigger role, or if it's further and further down the line or not. But so I thought that was kind of interesting. But the whole thing with him not actually being there, I just thought that was pretty silly. And it kind of cheapens the movie, like you said, a little bit. Not too terribly much, but yeah, it is kind of a weird thing for them to kind of throw in. It seems unnecessary, to be honest with you. But the biggest thing, and the thing that I think most people want to talk about and probably have been waiting for us to talk about, we kind of buried the lead a little bit there, is the fact that Mysterio at the stinger releases Peter's identity to everybody. Of course, he also kind of tricks people into thinking that Peter hurt people, but I think that's the lesser of the two things that happen in that stinger. The biggest one being the fact that Peter has always been famous as trying to keep his identity safe, and the fact that Mysterio is able to release it is a huge deal. And it's always something that I've always kind of had a problem with superhero movies in general, is the fact that superheroes don't generally kill people, but they try to keep their identity secret, but yet they don't kill the villain when they know their identity. So why wouldn't the villain just announce it as soon as he possibly could? So that's always something that's kind of bugged me. And so I did appreciate it in this movie. I'm definitely excited to see where it's going to take the character, because it is such a big deal when he does it in the comics in Civil War, and it does play a huge role. He does end up having to go, I think, with Doctor Strange to kind of create a spell to make people forget. I think there's a couple other characters that are involved in that, but I think Doctor Strange is the big one. And so he eventually gets his secret identity back, but I'm very curious to see how that's going to play out.
So here's a place where we'll disagree, and that's the fact that I hate it.
Oh, really?
So the only complaint I have with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and with Spider-Man now, I guess, is that secret identities don't matter. And that's not just a Marvel problem. I think that the same could be said for a lot of the DC characters in those movies as well. For me, secret identities have always been synonymous with superheroes, and now none of them have them. You know, Spider-Man especially is a character that has always tried to protect his identity, and it's been such a huge part of the character that I don't get why you make the decision offhand in a credit scene to reveal his identity to the entire planet. I mean, he wears a mask, so now, why the fuck would he wear a mask from now on? It doesn't make much sense to me, and it's kind of a bummer, unless you said something. I mean, you did say something that got my mind jogging, unless him and Doctor Strange team up at some point and Doctor Strange makes a spell to make people forget, which would be cool. But yeah, I don't know that I'm bought into the entire planet knowing the Spider-Man's secret identity.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to obviously play a big role. I don't know if it'll play a big role in the other MCU movies. Like, I don't think we'll get an answer to it until we see another Spider-Man movie. Maybe that's just something exclusive to his movies. Maybe we might get something in the next Avengers movie. I don't know. I don't know their slate. I don't know if they've really announced a whole lot after Spider-Man Far From Home. So we'll see when we're probably going to get our next answer to that question. It's definitely not going to come in the next Guardians movie because he doesn't really play a part in that. But I'm definitely excited to see how that's going to play.
Yeah, Marvel's actually going to Comic-Con this year, so maybe they'll announce their slate then.
Yeah, because they've been kind of secretive with it. I mean, it makes sense with Endgame being such a big deal and then Spider-Man coming right after it to be kind of like, hey, we don't want to give away what's happening. I mean, we know we're going to get another Black Panther. We know we're going to get another Doctor Strange. We just don't know when we're going to get them.
For sure.
All right, so that is it for our review of Spider-Man Far From Home. We will be ending this episode, as we do with most of our episodes, with a nerd favorite. We take turns picking a topic. The question pretty much stays the same every episode, what your favorite blank is. Of course, the topic changes from episode to episode. It is Tyler's turn this week, so what is nerd favorite this week?
It's funny. I think you said that, you know, we always stay in the same kind of format and say, what's your favorite blank? But I can't remember the last time we actually did a favorite blank. So we may have exhausted that idea, but we always do have the nerdy question. So my question is not a favorite. It is more just like a nerdy question for you. So in Spider-Man Homecoming, you know, the supporting character, the supporting hero in that movie was Tony Stark / Iron Man. In Spider-Man Far From Home, it was Nick Fury and Maria Hill. So I'm just curious if they were to put a different Marvel character into the third Tom Holland Spider-Man movie, what character you would like to see that be. So I'll go first to give you time to think. My answer is Daredevil. So those characters have always been kind of close in the comics because they both operate in New York City. And then I think that you use that as an opportunity to introduce the character to the movie universe and make him more super instead of being so ground level like he was in the Marvel show. You could also play off the secret identity aspect, and it's an opportunity to kind of get him into the fold now that the MCU needs some familiar names since Iron Man and Captain America won't be around anymore. And, you know, I wouldn't even say that you have to stick with Charlie Cox as the actor. I think that you could recast it if you wanted to. But either way, I think that it'd be a good opportunity to introduce another crime fighter from New York.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my choice as well. Daredevil is definitely a character that works really, really well with Spider-Man. Especially, I always think that the team-ups are always better in the comic books when you have like a straight man and you have a funny guy. And Spider-Man always is the funny guy. So I think those characters work so well, not just because they are both in New York, but because Daredevil is always kind of more serious and more brooding of a character. And then, of course, Spider-Man is more of a loose and kind of funny character. So I think they work well off of each other. The character that I keep thinking about as you were talking, and maybe it's just because we were literally just talking about him not too long ago, my mind went to a character that's already in the MCU that already kind of has a fun chemistry with the character, and that is Doctor Strange. I just think that they work so well off of each other in Infinity War. Unfortunately, we don't really see them together in Endgame, just because the chaos had already started at that point. But I think that they work well off of each other, and I would think that given what we just talked about with his secret identity, it would be kind of cool to see those two together. So that is my answer.
Awesome, man.
All right, so that is it for episode 247 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. Of course, we hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. That really, really helps us out. There's a lot of TV and movie podcasts out there, and to kind of separate us from the pack, it's nice to have those reviews and ratings. So definitely check us out there. Check out all of our content on our website, thenerdspodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook, facebook.com/The Nerds Podcast. And finally, email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt,
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.